everybody, and welcome to Ignite Radio Live.
You are with Greg and Stephanie Schlueter over the 5 mighty stations of Annunciation Radio for the Almighty.
Folks, we really encourage you to go to igniteradiolive.com and peruse some of the very relevant, important conversations we've had over recent months, just to pique your appetite. The wonderful Peter Herbeck last week showcased a bit of the shape of the battle. Which of us don't feel a battle, feel a sense of the battle playing out in and around us, keeping it real? And he is just marvelous in articulating that with such relevance. So that's just one of the many programs that, help us to understand the fog of war that is around us and within us. It's just keep it real. We are sinners working it out. All of us here on this planet destined for God's glory, desiring to communicate that. Awaken hearts and minds, right? Ephesians 5:14, awaken, O sleeper, rise from your death, let Christ's light shine on you. We just want to invite all who are listening to know that's where we're coming from tonight. We don't have, we are hardly perfect. We're working it out, but we're not going to erase that high call that God has destined us for because we fall short. I'll state that again. There's a high call that God has destined us for, that is the very nature of our beings, that we will not be satisfied until we seek it and pursue it. We're not going to erase that or presume to erase that because we fall short. Some people's that may be, a homosexual inclination. For others, maybe adultery. For others, maybe pornography. There are many vices and sins. All of us have our own. I'm not going to presume to erase that because I struggle. So tonight we're going to kind of continue that conversation, particularly in the shadow of the two conventions, the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention. And we really invite all who are listening to come with an open mind and an open heart to maybe set aside, if you will, our allegiances, our labels, our narratives that we've become very comfortable with. And really kind of Frank Sheed's book, Theology and Sanity, he says, to see the world sanely is to see it God-bathed. I invite us all to have the audacity to look at our lives and the world around us as God-bathed. What is God's desire and design? And don't dismiss, if you will, because it's a mess. It's hardly on this side of things angelic with perfect, pure forms. The Republican Party, hardly, not there. Democrats, I will say, certainly not there. But let's have the maturity and wisdom tonight to look at things God-bathed and to recognize it is a bit of a mess. But the Messiah is in the mess, and we're called to go there. Read a Catechism number 246. We are called as Catholic Christians to engage in this battle on this side of things in the political and social arena. So we're hoping to discuss that tonight in a folksy way, and we do invite you to contribute to the conversation. So again, Ignite Radio Live. So I'm going to set the stage by introducing, if you will, our two brothers guests with us tonight. And I couldn't be more jubilant to have these wonderful men of God, both lawyers, don't hold that against them. Both of them just extraordinarily gifted, and I think on an international stage, they bring wisdom, insight, humility, pursuit of God. I've known them for a while, and my wife wants to add to this.
No, we couldn't think of two better people to join us for this conversation. The wisdom that they will bring, the grace that they will bring, just delighted to have them. And they are.
Jeff Barefoot was a political science major from Miami of Ohio, my alma mater, woohoo. He's an attorney, CPA, certified financial planner, and a founder of a local wealth management firm. Check it out, folks. If you want wisdom and godly wisdom, Resourcement, check it out. Jeff Barefoot Resourcement. I highly recommend checking him out. Anyways, I continue. President of the Toledo Right for Life. He's a founding member and board vice president of the Right to Life Action Coalition of Ohio. By the way, read into that innumerable examples of his leadership that have seen tremendous effect for the benefit of unborn babies, their moms, and healing in this country. But that's what that title is packed into that title from my experience. And he was an initial board member of our Image Trinity Mass Impact movement and continues to be a great advisor. Now we shift to another of our wonderful guests, Lee Strang. He's a professor of law at the University of Toledo. He is a Harvard Law graduate. Don't hold that against against him. He is the positive fruit that can come out of Ivy League schools. I'm saying this with a little smile on my face, so grant me a little fiat here,
It might
people.
even be a big smile.
Exactly, big smile. He had a fellowship, the James Madison Fellowship, with Robbie George from Princeton, which was a very, I don't know how to describe it, elite invitation and opportunity for very few on the planet, and he was selected and included in that wonderful fellowship. And his recent book, which you should all check out, Originalism's Promise, a natural law account of the American Constitution. I'm going to say that again. Originalism's Promise, a natural law account of the American Constitution. Most consequentially, though, he is a husband and father with baby number 8 due to be born any moment. So if he cuts out any particular moment, that is a very possible reason. Welcome, Lee. Welcome, Jeff. How you guys doing?
Great.
Wonderful.
Well, we're going to begin by setting the stage. I'm going to ask Jeff, from innumerable conversations over breakfast, lunch, coffee, cigars, and scotch sometimes, just setting the stage for us, giving us insight of this moment in history, in light of which we can understand this current moment.
The election of Donald Trump was the greatest and most disrupting election since Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860. The parallels are quite similar. If you've ever been to the Abraham Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Illinois, you would see many newspapers published in the South by vituperative hatred of Lincoln. He was hated, he was despised, he was vilified. The South didn't just leave the United States. They left because they hated the election of Abraham Lincoln and would not accept the results of that election. After his assassination, America was never the same. We entered 1860 as one nation. We came out in 1864 a different nation. This is where we're at today. I did not support Donald Trump in the primaries. I was a Ted Cruz supporter. I met Donald Trump in the summer of 2015. I was mesmerized. I came with many pro-life leaders to listen to him. And when 90 minutes later, without notes, he accepted every question. This was not the man I had come to know in public. Donald Trump I used to call Donald Trump the Bobby Knight of politics. He would come out on the basketball court and throw chairs and beat his chest. He was stunningly thoughtful and engaging. And from the opening remarks, he was very religious. Of course, I didn't believe it at first. Here we are in 2020. What Donald Trump has done is he has completely changed politics in the United States. The Republican Party doesn't exist anymore as we knew it. The Democrat Party doesn't exist as we knew it. He is a transformational figure. I believe he is a transformational figure sent from God, not on his holiness or righteousness, but as his final call and last tool of his handiwork in the world. And he's not only changed American politics, but he's completely changed the bipolar world that we had grown up in, with the Soviet Union, United States. Donald Trump saw the problem of China years ago and was the sole voice against it, the only voice against China, and has now come to speak. If I may, for the readers, given the context, or the listeners, given the context of where we're at, I want to bring our attention to Romans chapter 13. I want to remember what John Paul II said over and over again, be not afraid. And the Lord told us to be not afraid. But here in Romans 13, we find a direct instruction from St. Paul to be afraid. As Lee's going to speak, I'm sure, in the United States, we don't have a king. The sovereign authority is the voting of the people. What we are experiencing is a complete corruption, demonic from its core, started in the Democrat Party decades ago. I believe we're in the final judgment of our anti-life movement. You cannot rip from the womb 55 million babies and walk around like you aren't going to have judgment. That's where we're at.
Jeff, very insightful, and just want to read these words of Pope Saint now John Paul II from his visit to Philadelphia on the bicentennial of our nation, 1976, and here at that historic place, he stated, "We are now standing in the face of the greatest historical confrontation humanity has gone through. I do not think that wide circles of the American society or wide circles of the Christian community realize this fully. We are now facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, of the gospel versus the anti-gospel. This confrontation lies within the plans of divine providence. It is trial, which the whole church, and the Polish church in particular, must take up. It is a trial of not only our nation and the church, but in a sense, a test of 2,000 years of culture and Christian civilization with all its consequences for human dignity, individual rights, human rights, and the rights of nations." This was obviously decades before we ever anticipated the acceleration in the last 3-4 years of questioning God's image in mankind and gender, man and woman made in God's image, and, if you will, banners woven in the name of tolerance and acceptance, actual violence and unrest, and discovering the levels of that being funded by nefarious forces that are all working right now to really define, if you will, a rather prominent, I'd say, political side, unquestionably, and every single one, we must add, as with us, destined to know God, destined for relationship with God, pining for relationship with God. Lee, what were your thoughts about what Jeff just shared?
Greg, I really appreciated Jeff's initial point, especially about how President Trump has been like, or was like, is like President Lincoln, and how transformative Lincoln was, that the country that went into the Civil War wasn't the same one that came out of it, in large measure because of Lincoln's leadership. And I'll say a couple other words, but I want to focus on that initially, that like Jeff, during the run-up to the 2016 election, I was not a supporter of President Trump. In fact, like Jeff as well, I was a supporter of Senator Cruz for a lot of reasons, I'm sure many of the same reasons. But then after President Trump became the primary candidate for the Republican Party, I took a hard second look at him, frankly, one that was initially very skeptical for a lot of reasons. I think primarily because of his public persona and some of the things that he had said over time. And what most influenced me as we led up to the election, and then after the election, as I was trying to process what just happened, I was influenced by the editor of First Things magazine. Rusty Reno is his name. And Rusty was writing a series of articles in his monthly column about what he perceived the election to be about. And then he eventually published those columns and some additional thoughts in a book called Return of the Strong Gods, which fits a lot of what Jeff was saying, and I'll just tease it out for our listeners.
Please.
What Reno described was that the President Trump phenomenon, or the Donald Trump phenomenon more generally, was of a piece with a number of other movements throughout the Western world, especially. So we had Brexit about the same time. There was the election of Viktor Orban in Hungary. Poland had an election of a more conservative party. You had responses to these were all responses, Reno claimed, and realignment politically in the West generally to a confluence of a number of factors. So some of them were cultural. So the way that people in the West, I'll just focus on the United States, lived. So you mentioned I've got 8 kids. My wife and I are still married after 21 years, and that's the way that some Americans live. It's not the way that other Americans live, and that's definitely a change from what we saw 50 years ago. I think the best book on the subject is called Coming Apart, and it's about how it was a survey of how Americans lived between 1950 and then I think the book was published around 2010. And in 1950, most people lived pretty much the same way. They might have a Cadillac instead of a Chevy. They might have 2 bathrooms instead of 1 bathroom. But most people lived basically the same way. They went to church together. They raised their kids in a certain way. And that cultural consensus is no longer the same. Instead, we have, this is a generalization, of course, we have 2 different Americas, 2 ways of living. And that relates economically. So economically, the people that I rub shoulders with at Princeton University or at Harvard Law School, they saw themselves as the natural leaders of the country. And it was which that itself isn't bad. In fact, in many ways, it's laudable. But many of them saw themselves as having been trained to kind of govern the rest of the people out in the hinterlands who needed leadership. The election of President Trump was actually powerful evidence, confirmatory evidence of the lack of their expert leadership. And where do they get this idea? They get this idea because they've been credentialed through a credentialing mechanism that people of a particular class, what Reno would call elites, what Jody Bottom in his book, which is now about 8 years old, called An Anxious Age, would call the elect, see themselves as the elect, as the people who are chosen because of their talents to lead the country. And they are rewarded handsomely, while many other Americans, i.e. those who vote for President Trump, tend to have not been rewarded by the increase, among other things, of globalization. And then there's religion, too. So America in 1950, the vast majority of Americans went to church once a week, if not more. And today, church going is aligned with economics and cultural significations that the people who are the elites or the elect tend not to be church going. They tend not to vote for the Republican candidates. And those who are religious tend to vote for the Republican candidates. And then lastly was the realignment internationally. And when you look at all of these different influences, Reno describes them, and I think this is true. They describe much of what we see today. And it's kind of interesting. Like, I don't know if you all have been paying attention to, there's been the Black Lives Matter movement, and some of the actions actually have kind of puzzled me. Like, I don't know if you've seen the videos of, there'll be an African American walking down the street, and they'll come into contact with a white person. And I saw one video in particular where the black person said that the white person had to get on her knees and to kiss the black person's feet.
Wow.
I was stunned that somebody would say that, but I was even more stunned when the other person meekly did it.
Wow.
And I think what that describes is one of the manifestations of being, this is Bottom's language, elect, is that you have the right views about, in this particular issue, what they argue is a history of systemic racism. And so it describes a lot of things that just were hard for me to understand. Why would somebody bow down and kiss a stranger's feet? And I think that cultural divide is an explanation for that. And Donald Trump is a disruptive force politically because he's representing the other Americans who culturally, economically, religiously, and in the international forum live like Americans had previously lived in the 1950s. So I appreciate Jeff's point, and I agree on that. I'm happy to talk more about politics, but I wanted to let you guide the conversation, Greg.
Listening to Lee's comments there, especially the story at the end with the video, like the word that came to my mind was just fear, and not a holy fear. It seems as if fear has gripped our nation, gripped our church in many ways, much to my sadness. But Jeff, can you speak to that word fear as you see it playing out in the landscape, spiritually, in regards to the life issues, however you want to go with that, but just wanting to direct that back to you?
First, I want to say to all the listeners that we're all in the same boat as Greg introduced us, that I don't know the heart of God really, and all I can do is look at the world around me. I think that Black Lives Matter and the woman bowing down to kiss the feet is really the outgrowth of the total collapse of womanhood in our culture. I've done a great deal of work with post-abortive women, know many of them. I have known many that have committed suicide, died of drug overdoses. When we have walking around in our culture for the first time in the history of the world, in Western culture, we have women walking around with artificial chemicals in their bodies after they're 16, 17, 18, till they're through menopause, with chemicals in their body that are designed to stop them from conceiving, disrupting the hormones of their very body created in the image of God. The fruitfulness of their wombs shut down. This will drive you insane. You don't touch the third rail of American feminism politics, which is contraception. but I'm going to touch it because what we're seeing in Portland and what we're seeing here is a complete societal breakdown from the disobedience to the natural function of the body. You know, the beauty of Catholicism is its unity between the body, mind, and soul.
Right.
As a Protestant convert, I see that. So the Black Lives Matter is really, in my opinion, a screen for the breakdown of culture.
Can I pause you for just a second, Jeff? Hold your thought, but just for our listeners' sake, please go to Black Lives Matter's site and see explicitly what they stand on. See their ideology spelled out so you know that we're not spinning some angry, hateful rhetoric. We're describing objectively what they speak of and stand on with regard to sexuality, with regard to the nuclear family, et cetera, et cetera. So as my brother Jeff here continues to speak in Lee, we want you to know that we want to be anchored in truth, what is represent people per their own words. So what Jeff is speaking of is validated in their actual self-descriptions. I'm sorry, Jeff, continue.
What we want really ultimately is to love one another in the way our Lord asks us to do so. And it's not just the collapse of the feminine body. It's the total collapse of manhood as well. A world that will kill its own is naturally destined to destroy femininity, masculinity, the absence of fathers in the home. These men, so-called men that are 30, 35, 40 years old, that are running wild in the streets of Seattle and Austin and Portland and New York, you'll notice they always come out at night in the dark. Quite appropriate for Joe Biden to talk about dark and light. But that's really, Black Lives Matter is just the screen. And the poor Black men in this country who have no fathers, and as a result of having no father leadership, being driven into a promiscuity that robs them of their manhood. Donald Trump has seen this. This man is not, you know, Lee and I both agree, he was not somebody we'd want to be pals with in 2016. But I'm mesmerized by the transformation that's happening to him. Amen. And his family.
Yes, yes.
You know, it reminds me again of Lincoln. Lincoln entered the White House in 1860 as one kind of a man. And when the bullet went through his brain, he was a different kind of man.
When the story is told many years down the road, and we are able to see, hopefully weaned from the toxic Kool-Aid of the culture that many of us have been exposed to, whether we're watching it, absorbing it or not, it's in the air, it's in the culture, it's in the atmosphere, it affects the way we think. And not to know that we are influenced by it is a certain kind of grave concern and ignorance. But when the story's told and we're sobered up and looking at this, the heroes will be many, and I hate to invoke and appropriate the identity politics thing because it shouldn't matter black or white. They have no contingency on truth or objective as truth. But the heroes will be seen as the Candace Owens and the Larry Elders, very intelligent, thoughtful, prayerful, on-point black leaders who take to task a lot of these things that purport to be in the best interests of if you will, minorities. But peel back the layers objectively, look at the facts, and I just invite our audience to do that. Look at the facts of what has actually advanced the best interests, the common good, shall we say. Aristotle spoke of flourishing, which actually have advanced and is advancing the lives of across the board demographics, but particularly minorities. So this is a key part of this program, just that we would, with humility, explore beyond the narratives, beyond personalities, if you will, to positions, and really examine the rhetoric. Lee, we are accountable for the decisions that we make, particularly in the political marketplace of ideas, and they need to be informed decisions. So I'm going to ask you, can you give us a bit of a perspective of the framework? What is the godly Catholic framework for looking at and evaluating political matters?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So I think the first thing to note is that, at least in our religious tradition, there's not a blueprint. There's not a very particularized roadmap about kind of political system that Christians must or should live in. There's a long tradition in our tradition of debating different types of regimes. So Thomas Aquinas famously said that the best type of regime is a mixed regime that has monarchical, aristocratic, and democratic elements, and that I think is generally probably where the consensus lies, but not in those particular examples that St. Thomas gave. So we don't have a specific blueprint that tells us what our regime should look like, what our political system, what our legal system should look like. But instead, what we have are guide points about if we're in a particular type of political system, how should we, in our different roles in that political system, operate? And our political system is one that has popular input in a lot of ways: voting, advocacy, giving money, doing speech, going door to door. And so, what's our role as citizens, and in a regime where there's significant popular input? And I think what that means is you look back and see, well, what is the purpose of politics in a country like ours? And the purpose of politics is choosing the means to pursue the common good with other people in our community who disagree with us, sometimes with good reasons and sometimes with poor reasons. And there's, a simple example I would say would be thinking of highway regulations, that they tend not to be super controversial, with one caveat. I remember when I was really young, the speed limit on the interstate was 55, and that seemed to make a lot of people angry. But other than kind of unusual situations, that's a manifestation of we as citizens, we elect people, we call our representatives, we advocate for speed limits or too much safety regulation, not enough safety regulation, too much environmental regulation, not enough environmental regulation. And in most of those kind of discussions and debates, there's a lot of room for reasonable, good faith disagreement. And so it explains why, one of the reasons why politics in a free system like ours has a lot of debate, sometimes positive, but oftentimes acrimonious. And today's political environment certainly is not the most acrimonious that we've ever had in our country. And that also includes that this approach to politics as being about choosing the means to the common good with people who disagree with us includes very important and very controversial subjects like abortion. So is it the case? So I think, as a pro-life American, that the best approach that our legal system nationally and locally could take would be to have a prohibition on the taking of unborn human life. I recognize that that's not practically attainable in the near term, and probably not even in the medium term. And so what I have to do when I'm as a citizen and in any other roles that I take is think about, with people who disagree with me, and it could be pro-life folks, right? So I have many pro-life friends who in good faith think that we should immediately pursue a ban on all abortions, full stop. And I respect that judgment. I disagree with that judgment. But then there's also, of course, citizens who in good faith and sometimes in bad faith, who are pro-abortion or pro-choice, who want to have as much access to abortion as possible. And so in that environment, my goal as a citizen is to try to pursue and advocate for the position that is practically realizable for my community as it currently stands, with an eye towards the ideal, right? So I'm always aiming for the ideal, but what is it that I can achieve right now? And so politics in our type of system is the art of the practical. And one way that I try to think about this, for example, regarding abortion, but also really for other issues like presidential selection, it actually providentially goes back to Jeff's invocation of President Lincoln, was to think about, if I were an American citizen in the antebellum era, and one of my positions was that I thought slavery was unethical, and my ultimate goal would be, I want slavery to be eliminated within the jurisdiction of the United States. But I would probably realize, this is the position I'm advocating for, I would realize that was not a practically realizable goal, at least in the short term, and probably not in the medium term. Although there certainly were people who would be, I think, figuratively to my right, or maybe to my, I don't know actually what side they'd be on, like James Barney, who was a presidential candidate, who was an abolitionist, a more radical abolitionist, who would advocate for, let's stop slavery right now, full stop. And then you had people like Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln, I think, is my paradigm example of a president, at least in this context, of his goal was ultimate extinction. He recognized the practical realities of the situation, where he could push, where he could nudge. So Lincoln's current position when he was running for office was to limit the spread of slavery, to use federal power where he could to limit that spread, to prevent that spread, and maybe to nudge it back a little bit within those states where it was at. And so I think to summarize what I was saying, Greg, that we as citizens have a duty to pursue an ideal, the good ideal, in means that are practically realizable in our current circumstances. And to not let the ideal, I guess a corollary is, to not let the ideal be the enemy of the good things that we can achieve right now. Don't vote for James Barney, would be my argument. Vote for Abraham Lincoln.
Appreciate that, Lee. And just for some clarification, by the way, Jeff, you were battling with the bubonic plague, and so I was minimizing the audio. Feel free to click in here. I just want to ask a question. You had suggested that if we are capable, by that I mean the president and both houses, if we had the capacity either for an amendment or to minimize abortion completely legally, are you suggesting you would not be in favor of that?
No. I would definitely be in favor of that. I just don't think that scenario that you spun, Greg, is going to happen in the short term or even in the medium term.
And I think obviously as we're speaking about legal matters, we all have to be mindful that we can put a lot of energy inordinately on things beyond our power, beyond our means. We need to advocate, but the big question looks back on us as husbands and wives. Are we forming cultures of encounter? Are we forming the kind of godly men and women? And I say that is a much higher priority. I want to press you, Lee, a little bit, and Jeff, invite you to kick in. Maybe, and I appreciate your backdrop, but what I'm going for is as we look at a field of candidates, I do think there's a given framework to evaluate the good. And there's a hierarchy of values. For instance, simply life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. One's right to life surpasses another's right to, shall we say, freedom. Going to a stop sign in just about every law we think of is a subordination to the ultimate or higher value of the protection of a life. And if hypothetically respective parties represent each one, that we ought to give the highest regard to the protection of human life over other threats. To put it in sort of a maybe allegorical way, Hitler was not remembered for his economic advances. Hitler was not remembered for other great things he may have accomplished. We recall him for the horrific advocacy and enactment of fuel killing millions of people, and that's our situation, of course, with the unborn. In other words, I'm making the case that it merits the highest of consideration, with due note that obviously if such a person who represents the protection of human life has sufficient administrative wherewithal, that isn't putting the nation, the republic, in danger. Is that fair?
I don't think anything I said was in tension with or disagreed with what you were saying, Greg. I didn't touch in particular on as a citizen, what are the ideals that you should strive for in a practically realizable format? And it is clearly the case that some goods are more valuable than others, and speed limits are less valuable than for example, religious liberty. Mm-hmm. And so it is the case when we're thinking as citizens, we're thinking about the common good of our community in a practically realizable fashion. And some parts of the common good are essential. So for example, the dignity of the individual members of that community is the most important facet of that. And then there are other means that help us achieve that. So for example, one of the important aspects of individual flourishing is the religious liberty of those individuals to pursue the transcendent as they best see fit. Mm-hmm. And that has to be prioritized over other things. And in particular, it has to be prioritized. It has to be a goal that there can be disagreement about how we pursue that goal. So my ideal is robust religious liberty for all Americans. And in good faith, and sometimes in bad faith, we'll have debates and discussions with other Americans who disagree about how to achieve that goal.
Lee, let me be really practical. Following the Democratic Convention and the Republican Convention, looking with a Catholic lens, what takeaways do you have?
Okay, that's a good question. And I love it, Greg, that you were focusing on the parties and not so much their personalities.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some things about Donald Trump's personality that I actually kind of, I think he's like Janus face, where I like and dislike at the same time.
For sure.
So his bombastic nature is in some ways, I think, a negative, because I would rather have a George Washington style president as opposed to a more bombastic president. But at the same time, that kind of large personality also protects the lesser among us to engage in substantive but also important speech. So what would I take away from that? I would look at the party's platforms, and I would look at the actions of the respective candidates, and thinking about the important things that allow a community to live together well. So we talked about pro-life, and the Republican Party has been consistently pro-life. President Trump has been, I think it's probably fair to say, the most pro-life modern president that we've had, and I'll defer to Jeff's thoughts on that. Everything from judges to tax policy to the briefs that the Department of Justice files in different cases. Religious liberty. So there's been robust protection for religious liberty, kind of in lots of really creative ways too. So some of our listeners may not be aware that one of the initiatives by the Trump administration was that there is now an annual conference on religious liberty throughout the world, and that the State Department makes it a priority in a way that had not been the case before, that religious liberty is going to be protected not just at home, but abroad. Free speech. Free speech is another aspect of human flourishing in reasonable circumstances. So kids maybe have less free speech than college students, for example. But free speech is under pressure in lots of areas of American life, including in political life, right? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things that a person isn't supposed to say, or if they do, that they are automatically branded one name or another. And so the Republican Party and the Trump administration have worked hard in spheres of their influence to protect free speech. And then I would say, kind of for each of those points and other points, that I see the Democratic Party as not only not protecting the right to life, but as pushing against it very strongly, as not only not protecting religious liberty, but as trying to minimize religious liberty that they see as more valuable, and the same with free speech and other values as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Response.
The conventions this last week were probably the greatest political media bombshell since 1960, when the Kennedy-Nixon debates occurred. Everybody that has some sense of political history knows that if you had listened to the radio in 1960 debates, Nixon won the debates. If you watch it in television, Kennedy mopped the floor with Nixon because of the power of media. Right. Donald Trump not only has become a billionaire by being a real estate developer, but he also then became the most successful reality show television producer. And he knows how to put on a show. So the shutdown of the conventions, which was a basket of lemons turned into a lemon meringue pie for him. I like that. It was absolutely stunning and reflected the transformation of the political parties. I don't believe we have anything that looks at all like the Democrat Party of Hubert Humphrey, John Kennedy, or
for sure
Bill Clinton. We also don't have anything that looks at all like the Republican Party of George Bush. Yep. It's gone. It's gone forever. We have a new generation coming behind us. Now, let's try this question out on our listeners. It's 1939. I'm living in London, and I'm hearing that the Third Reich is killing Jews. And my response is, I'm personally against the killing of Jews, but I don't see why I should tell Germans what they should do with their own free choice. This is exactly where we're at. And Great Britain did not want that war, but it was forced on them, and this is where we're at. Lee knows my great respect for his scholarly approach, and he knows much more than I ever will on these issues, but we're at the beginning of a violent war. It's not going to be a civil war, because for a civil war, you need, geography and armies that can take positions of defense and offense. But all you have to do is look at Seattle and Portland, and you understand their burning hatred for anything and everything that is not anarchy. They don't even have an agenda. And, you know, when we go to Mass, we ask that, you know, we confess that we want forgiveness for the sins we've committed and those that we have omitted. The Democrat Party is willfully omitting the truth. And the Republican Party has done it too. And this is one of the things that happened with Right to Life Action Coalition in Ohio is that we could no longer allow the pro-life movement to become the bastard child of the Republican Party, that they could just, you know, the rhinos could just use the pro-life movement to get elected, but not really do anything legislatively to stand up against it. Lee recommended a book about coming apart, and that's really where we're at. It looks very much to me like 68. It's much more like, it's not 1968, it's much more like 1860. We're losing the culture we were born into. And I might say too, the Catholic Church is part of this. I mean, I went on Easter Sunday, as we all were shut down by the Kasich-DeWine administration. And I use that term because it fits. It's John Kasich and Mike DeWine who, you know, use the pro-life banner, but then don't really live it out.
In significant ways, for sure.
Yeah. And so it's Easter Sunday, 2:30. And of course, we had no Mass for the first time since I don't know, since the Lord.
Right.
Yeah. I went over to pray at the church, and I won't mention what church I go to, which parish I'm part of, but I walked up at the front doors at 2:30 in the afternoon. The doors are locked on Easter Sunday.
Heartbreaking.
Quite symbolic of where we're at.
Right.
And, you know, finally, one more response. It's not just the politicians. Religion is, you know, clearly religion is downstream from politics. Politics is downstream from culture. And the Catholic Church is downstream from religion. We have to remember that every single bishop but one in England apostatized. When push came to shove, Catholic England was destroyed, and it was destroyed with the full consent of the bishops.
Right.
Spot on, Jeff and Lee. Folks, you're tuned into Ignite Radio Live. I might describe this as the title is "What the Heaven is Going On," taking Romans 5:20, "For where sin abounds, grace abounds more." We're not going to give the enemy the credit of being the one that's guiding the show. The big show is being guided by the one Lord, Latin root dom. He has dominion. He is overall. We're not fighting for victory. We're fighting from victory. And in the midst of this present darkness and these difficulties, God has always had from the very beginning of time the upper hand, and we are meant to look at this, appraise these things from the vantage of Him who is Lord and victorious. And I would even shift this in these last moments of this wonderful conversation for more to follow, hopefully in the next couple months leading up to this election. But shift this in the direction of asking, you know, how do we assume the inheritance that God has called us to by virtue of baptism, to take up the sword of righteousness, to enter the battle, Ephesians 6:12. How do we do this? And I might suggest, instead of just pointing the finger, we got to point out those areas of conflict and concern. And I might say this boldly, that the world is tripping over the low bar set by the church. I'll say it again. The world is tripping over the low bar set by the church. I think key to revival is recognizing the very low bar image and vision that we have for marriage, for family, for sacrament. And in the depths of our souls, we've been fashioned, right, for an excellence, a fullness, without which we're languishing. Everybody listening right now, myself included, until we have the audacity to break through and seek the Holy Spirit to fan that flame and see the truth that we've been destined for. I don't care what we're doing. I don't care what physical or material or professional accomplishments we make. We're going to be living in darkness. We're going to be experiencing the effects of that darkness. So part of this, I want your comments on, Jeff and Lee, is, how do we more fully put in front of us that light and live and walk in it as occasions of inspiring, if you will, those around us to know that that there is power in Christ's life, death, and resurrection and Pentecost, that this is not meant to be just a conceptual noetic assent of knowledge of truth, but to know him who is truth, to manifest his kingdom, so that, dare I say, our prayer, our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Your thoughts? Let's begin with Lee.
Thanks, Greg. That's it. In some ways it's tough, in some ways it's easy. So I think the prescription for how we as Christians do that is longstanding, that we have a robust prayer life, both as individuals and then our domestic churches. We participate in the sacraments on a regular basis, especially sacraments that provide the grace to repair and to rebuild the relationships in our families, and so there's the religious aspect, which isn't exclusive for what I'm going to say next. In fact, I think it follows from, and that's our public actions, and so all of us have time, talent, and treasure given by God in different quantities and different aspects. We have to identify what those are, and then work towards in our spheres of influence implementing those in our lives. And it can be lots of things. I'll just give one anecdote. So in my life, of course, I've got children, and so education has been important to Elizabeth and I, and we've worked hard in lots of different capacities to try and provide great educational options for our kids, and that's included homeschooling and working with other homeschooling families. That's included Catholic schooling and working with our local parish school, and that's included other options as well, where we spend a lot of time, including Northwest Ohio Classical Academy, the goal of trying to find ways to bring to bear our time, talent, and treasure in a way that enriches not just our own family, but our community, and then hopefully ultimately even broader than that.
For the benefit of our listeners, just a mini shout out to NOCA, Northwest Ohio Classical Academy. Lee is one of the founders, certainly principal driver with his wife. It is an extension of Hillsdale College, where I'm proud my brother's a professor there and a son is a student there. And really, it is a phenomenal virtue formation atmosphere and purpose, the result of which is fully human excellence. I just really encourage many educational options. I'm not downplaying others, but I would say give NOCA a look. As homeschoolers, Steph and I ourselves, there's a lot of resonance with what we have done with our children with Mother of Divine Grace. By the way, folks, there was a phenomenal conversation with Denise DeRocher a few episodes back talking about homeschooling, why not, really wanting to address those objections, especially in this climate of uncertainty and doubt and digitization, if you will, of education. Check it out. But thank you, Lee, for that. Jeff?
Well, I think one of the things we need to look at, too, is how it's not just in the political realm, but within the Catholic Church. Quite fascinating, really, to look at the public religious presentation of Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi. Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, for their entire political lives, have made it a point to speak of their Catholicism. But anybody that objectively looks at what they are would have to say not only are they not Catholic in the way they live their lives, but they're definitively anti-Catholic,
yes,
anti-Christian,
yes.
Anti-life, anti-family, anti-human sexuality.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody can deny that. And yet we have many, many leaders in the Catholic Church that say, well, they care for the poor. Mm. And you look at Donald Trump, and I think, one of the objections that I had was his public persona. Mm-hmm. But let's look at the public persona now that has transpired in 4 years. Does the man walk across the street from the White House with a Bible and try to stop a burning church? Yes. Does the man with his wife go to pray at the St. John Paul Center? Mm-hmm. Yes. Does he honor God? Yes. as chairman of the Republic, as the head of the Republican Party, what did we see in the convention? I was just absolutely mesmerized with the religious tones of the convention. Abby Johnson. Yeah, and we closed the convention with Ave Maria.
Right. Tell me that wasn't beautiful.
Right? Yeah. Stunning. One person after another who honored God. Does the man love his wife publicly? Does he honor her publicly? Do his children stand up and give him great laud? Does he love the country? Does he honor Christ every single time he has an opportunity to do so? Yes, he does. So what don't we like about Donald Trump? That he was a playboy 35 years ago? Well, I'm very sorry to tell you, my life has not been perfect. We just recently in our diocese had a scandal down in Finley. I don't know if the priest is guilty, but if you read the complaint and you read the FBI investigation, it's absolutely horrifying. Now, what should be our response as Catholic citizens to that kind of scandal? I know what my response is. My response is it strikes the fear of God in me. That it calls me to look at the depravity of my own living and how much without the mercy and blood of Christ, I would be destined to hell. We can't believe that political parties could ever be doing the things that they're doing. I think Donald Trump is a Constantine figure in some ways, meaning he's not the perfect Christian, but has the man spiritually grown in the office, and has the man consistently stood up for Christ? I believe he has.
Yes,
and I think Donald Trump. And one final thing, if somebody in the listening audience is saying, well, I don't like his personality and his bombastics and his tweets, but I can't vote for Joe Biden either because of his position. Well, we started with Romans 13, and sovereignty is vested in the people in this country. And a lot of blood by a lot of people that wanted to live was spilled for our right to vote. Failing to vote is a coward's way out, and it's the sin of omission. You don't have the opportunity in this crisis to not vote. You must vote, and you have to choose. Are you going to vote for Donald Trump, or are you going to vote for Joe Biden?
On the binary political landscape, there are other options, and conscience might direct us to those, but practically, it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be one platform or the other. Set the personalities aside. It's going to be a vote to protect human life from conception to natural death, to affirm religious freedom, to affirm these qualities that we realize are so important, or not. So blessed to have you, Lee Strang and Jeff Barefoot, to be with us. I would just maybe leave our audience with the awareness of something that kind of emerged even before the George Floyd thing, and that was that our identity, our core identity, ought not be reduced to lesser things. So black, white, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, atheist, all those, I don't want to dismiss that they're valuable and maybe to understand facets of who we are. But our deepest identity is we are sons and daughters of God through Jesus Christ. Whether we affirm that or not, as the sun is bright and hot, whether we think it or not, the truth of our nature and the capacity to live in that fullness is the degree to which we recognize that, live in it, and walk in it. And let me say that to some extent, this issue of the church awakening and self-reform, which many godly priests, cardinals, bishops, God bless Vigano for his heroic articulation of many of these things. So many commentators, Cardinal Sarah, who are bringing in front of us, Monsignor Pope, God bless you for having the audacity to open up the doors to the mess that lies hidden beneath and invites us to self-reform, repentance, all of that. Yes. I just want to point out the reality that one of the strongholds that stands in the way of Orthodox Catholics, which is maybe many of us listening, one of the strongholds that keeps us from operating and exhibiting the kingdom. Just invite us to think about this at the end of this program is not ritual, which is given by Christ to literally participate in him, but ritualism. A reduction of this phenomenal faith we have to checklist, go through the motions, connect the dots forms versus a Picasso flush, a Rembrandt flush with color and life and light. Ritualism versus ritual. Pope Benedict put it so clearly in the Jesus of Nazareth trilogy that it's relationship at the heart of ritual, relationship at the heart of religion. It is played out more consequentially in our homes than on any political stage, in any halls of Congress. It's questions such as this: when is the last time, Dad and Mom, you gathered your family together to meaningfully talk and pray, to share from the heart the reality of God alive in us, to live our nature as image, icons of the Trinity? When's the last time you made that happen? Those are the consequential kind of questions that we have to consider. And to that end, we, Steph and I and our listeners here and others who've been involved, really urge you to please check out ilovemyfamily.us. This week begins another 7-week journey to get people in the seat and discover the transforming power of husband and wife with kids, making it a priority, putting that flag in the sand, encountering this vital grace of God, pouring forth into our marriages and families, the transforming effect that it has. We can say this now over 7 years. Families that do this, that recognize this, again, presupposing orthodoxy, presupposing the grace of the sacraments, families that recognize this value are seeing tremendous growth, encouragement, and transformation. And I also want to direct you to something called oneheartonecity.us. Oneheartonecity.us. It is a union of Catholics, non-Catholic Christians united in seeking to bring the presence of Christ, the love of Christ, to public places. That word ecclesia, church, it doesn't mean just to gather. It means to go. It means to go to places and have confidence in the power of God to transform other lives, to make them aware of their nature and love. I know it's a long monologue from Greg. You guys are now used to it at this point. But so blessed to have you, Lee and Jeff. We love you guys. We pray for blessings on the Strang family as you're anticipating the birth, the revelation of the beautiful little Strang child number 8. And all of you out there who are struggling in any way, we declare God's love. We declare God's love and His grace surrounding you in your marriage and family and home, that there is transformation, and God invites us to experience that. Let's lift up our Pope. Let's lift up our Bishop Thomas, who's a wonderful man of God, who's faced with difficult challenges. Let's lift up our priests. But most importantly, let's have the audacity to see the truth that Christ calls us to and to live in it fully. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. God bless you.